With a shy voice, she confessed, "I've never done this before." And he made her feel safe. No one expected that night would change everything, revealing a true love between them. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss the emotional ending. Elise's hands trembled as she whispered those words that made her heart pound so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. "I've never done this before." Her voice came out shaky, barely audible, whilst her hazel eyes fixed on the wooden floor of the small flat. The afternoon light streamed through the open windows, creating golden patterns on the boards worn by time. Outside, the city continued its frantic rhythm, but in here the world had stopped. Graham remained motionless for a moment that seemed to stretch infinitely. At 36, with silver threads beginning to appear at his temples and expression lines around his eyes, he had learned that certain words demanded respect and time to process. His blue shirt was slightly rumpled, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing tanned forearms. He carefully set down the bottle of wine he was holding onto the coffee table. "That's all right," Graham said finally, and there was so much care in those two words that Elise felt something loosen in her chest. "There doesn't have to be anything you don't want." She raised her eyes then, meeting his gaze. Graham had those dark eyes that seemed to see beyond the masks people wore. There was no judgment there, no rush, no expectation, just a patience she'd never seen in anyone. "I want to," Elise murmured, and her cheeks flushed intensely. "It's just that I've never... with anyone..." The words trailed off, but Graham understood. He always understood, even when she couldn't finish her sentences. Slowly, like someone approaching a frightened bird, he sat down beside her on the two-seater sofa. The proximity made Elise's heart race again. "Elise," he spoke her name with a softness that made her close her eyes for an instant. "Look at me." She obeyed, turning to face him. Graham extended his hand but didn't touch her, leaving his palm open between them like an invitation, not a demand. Elise looked at that hand, large, calloused from years working on building sites before having his own architecture firm, and slowly intertwined her fingers with his. "I'm not going anywhere," Graham said, gently squeezing her hand. "There's no rush. There never was and never will be." Tears burned in Elise's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. At 24, she'd spent her entire life feeling inadequate, behind everyone else. Whilst her university friends accumulated stories of relationships, dramatic breakups, and nights of adventure, she remained on the sidelines watching, not for lack of interest but from a paralyzing fear of not being enough. "Why are you so patient with me?" she asked, her voice still small. Graham smiled, that slow smile that lit up his entire face. "Because you're worth it. Because what we're building is worth it." The answer was simple but carried a weight that Elise felt settle in her chest. It wasn't just pretty words. It was a promise. Outside, an ambulance passed with sirens blaring, and the noise brought Elise back to reality. She realized she was still sitting there, hand in Graham's, in his flat that was beginning to feel familiar. The shelves full of architecture books, the plants he tended with almost religious dedication, the small photo of his daughter on the desk. "Tell me," Graham asked gently, "what are you feeling right now?" Elise took a deep breath. This was another thing about him. Graham didn't shy away from difficult conversations. He dove into them with the same attention he dedicated to his projects. "Fear," she admitted. "A lot of fear. Of disappointing you. Of not knowing what to do. Of you realizing that I'm too inexperienced." "Inexperienced at what exactly?" Graham questioned, tilting his head. "At being human. At feeling. Because as far as I can tell, you do both of those things very well." His logic was so simple it almost hurt. Elise let out a tremulous laugh. "It's different," she insisted. "You've lived so much. You've been married, have a daughter, you've loved—" "And you think that makes me better than you somehow?" Graham interrupted gently. "Elise, I carry scars you can't imagine. My marriage was a battlefield. I spent years trying to keep something together that was broken from the start. Experience doesn't mean wisdom. Sometimes it just means you've made mistakes more times." His words hung in the air. Elise realized she'd always seen Graham as someone who had all the answers. But here he was, admitting his own failures. "So we're both scared," she asked, almost in a whisper. Both scared, Graham confirmed, but also both here deciding this is worth the risk. He moved a bit closer, still giving space for Elise to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to. For the first time in ages, she wanted to stay, wanted to feel, wanted to risk. "Can we go slowly?" Elise asked, and hated how fragile her voice sounded. "We can go at whatever pace you need," Graham responded immediately. "One day at a time, one moment at a time, until you feel ready for the next step." Elise nodded, and then, gathering all the courage she possessed, leaned forward and rested her head on his shoulder. Graham stayed completely still for a second, and then his arms enveloped her carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Thank you," Elise murmured against the fabric of his shirt, which smelled of a mixture of soap and something that was uniquely Graham. "For what?" he asked, his voice reverberating in his chest. "For not making me feel strange? For not being in a rush?" Graham kissed the top of her head, a gesture so gentle it almost went unnoticed. "You're not strange. You're careful. There's a huge difference." They stayed like that whilst the afternoon transformed into evening outside, the sounds of the city gradually diminishing, and Elise thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found someone with whom she could lower all her defenses, slowly, with fear, but truly. Because some confessions weren't about weakness. They were about trust, and she was beginning to trust him in a way she'd never trusted anyone. The morning sunlight flooded the small flat that Elise shared with a university friend, creating golden reflections in the coffee mug she held between her hands. It was Sunday, and she knew she'd have to face the weekly lunch at her parents' house. Normally, these gatherings were monotonous and predictable, but today there was a different weight in the air. She had told her mother about Graham on Thursday, over the phone. Like a coward, she thought to herself, taking a sip of the now cold coffee. The call had been short and sharp. "Mum, I'm seeing someone." "Oh, that's wonderful, darling. Who's the chap? Did you meet at work?" "Not exactly. He's an architect. He's 36. The silence that followed was deafening. 36? Her mother's voice had risen 2 octaves. "Elise, you're 24. That's quite a gap." 12 years, Mum. It's not that... 12 years? Good God, what will people think? And is he divorced? Does he have children? Elise had closed her eyes, bracing for impact. "He has a daughter. She's 8. The shriek that came from the other end of the line made Elise pull the phone away from her ear. The conversation had deteriorated rapidly after that, ending with her mother demanding she turn up for Sunday lunch to discuss this properly. Now wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, Elise looked at herself in the hallway mirror. Her chestnut hair fell over her shoulders, and she noticed the dark circles under her eyes. She'd slept poorly all night, mentally rehearsing all the arguments she could use. Her mobile buzzed on the table. A message from Graham. "It's going to be fine. Remember, you don't need anyone's approval to be happy, but I'm here if you need me. Always." Elise smiled despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. She typed back quickly, "Thanks, I'm going to need all the luck in the world today." The response came almost instantly. "Not luck. Courage. And you have plenty of that." Her parents' house was in a quiet neighborhood, with tree-lined streets and semi-detached houses that looked similar to each other. She'd grown up there, on that street where everyone knew everyone, where gossip spread faster than wildfire. When she rang the doorbell, it was her father who opened the door. A tall, bald man with reading glasses hanging from his neck. He had a weary expression on his face. "Your mother is, agitated," he warned in a low voice, giving Elise space to enter. "I tried to talk to her, but you know your mother." Elise knew. Helen was a woman of strong opinions and an even stronger voice. A retired teacher, she now dedicated her time to tending the garden and worrying excessively about what the neighbors thought. "Elise!" the voice echoed from the kitchen. "Come here, I need to speak with you." Taking a deep breath, Elise followed to the kitchen, where the familiar smell of spices and home cooking normally comforted her. Today, however, her stomach was too knotted to appreciate it. Helen was turned away, stirring a pot on the cooker with brusque movements that betrayed her irritation. When she turned around, Elise saw that her mother's eyes were red. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Helen began without preamble, setting down the wooden spoon forcefully. "A 36-year-old man with a daughter. Elise, you've barely begun to live." "Mum, I'm 24. I'm not a child." "It's not about age," Helen retorted, approaching. "It's about experience. You've never seriously dated anyone, never truly lived on your own, and now you're going to get involved with a man who already has an entire life built, who has responsibilities. You're going to be a stepmother without even knowing what it's like to be a mother." Each word was like a knife, not from malice, but from how they echoed Elise's own fears. "I know I don't have experience," Elise said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But does that mean I can never have it? That I need to wait until I'm, what, perfect?" "That's not it," Helen sighed, running her hand through her hair. "It's that you're skipping steps. You should be dating someone your own age, experiencing normal things couples do, not jumping straight into a complicated situation with an older man who comes with baggage." "Baggage?" Elise felt anger begin to bubble. "His daughter isn't baggage, Mum, she's a child. And Graham isn't old, he's mature. He respects me in a way no bloke my age ever has." "Because he sees you as young," Helen practically shouted. "An inexperienced girl he can mold however he wants." "That's not true," Elise shot back, surprised by her own vehemence. "He doesn't treat me like that. He's patient because he knows I have my fears, not because he wants to control me." Elise's father appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding the newspaper. "You two need to lower your voices. The neighbors will hear." "Let them hear," Helen turned to him. "Aren't you going to say anything? Your daughter is getting involved with a man 12 years older." David sighed, folding the newspaper. "Helen, I met you when you were 21, and I was 32. 11 years difference." The silence that followed was absolute. Elise blinked, processing the information. She'd never stopped to think about her parents' age gap. Helen opened and closed her mouth several times. That was different," she finally managed to say. "Was it?" David asked calmly. "Or are you afraid that Elise will make the same mistakes you think you made?" The question cut deep. Helen turned back to the cooker, her shoulders tense. Elise looked at her father with gratitude. "I'm not saying I approve or disapprove," David continued, now addressing his daughter. "I don't know this man, but you deserve the chance to make your own choices, and your own mistakes, if that's the case." "Thank you, Dad," Elise murmured. "But," he raised a finger, "I want to meet him. I want to look into the eyes of the man who's seeing my daughter and see what sort of person he is." Elise nodded. That was fair. "I'll speak with him." Helen was still turned away, but her shoulders trembled slightly. Elise approached carefully. "Mum," she said softly, touching the woman's arm, "I know you're worried. I'm worried too. But Graham makes me happy in a way I didn't know was possible." Helen finally turned, and there were tears in her eyes. "I just don't want you to get hurt. You've always been so sensitive, so closed off. And now you're opening up to a man who could hurt me," Elise completed. "Yes, he could, but he could also make me incredibly happy, and I want to risk it." Her mother pulled her into a tight embrace, the kind she hadn't given since Elise was a child. "You've always been so cautious. I've never seen you throw yourself into anything like this." "Because it was never worth it before," Elise responded, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "But he is." Later, seated at the dining table with plates of food they'd barely touched, Helen cleared her throat. "If he's going to meet the family," she said with a voice that tried to sound firm but trembled slightly, "it needs to be a proper dinner, not some casual encounter. I want to know this man properly." Elise felt a mixture of relief and new nervousness. "All right, I'll speak with him." "And his daughter," Helen continued, staring fixedly at her plate. "How is she coping with this?" The question caught Elise off guard. "She's still getting used to the idea." "I imagine so," Helen murmured. "Poor child. It must be difficult for her seeing her father with someone else." For the first time, Elise saw genuine empathy in her mother's eyes. Perhaps she really did care, even if in a suffocating way. "Graham is being very careful about it," Elise explained. "He doesn't want to force anything." Helen nodded slowly. "At least that. A responsible father." It was a small step, but it was something. When Elise left her parents' house a few hours later, she felt as if she'd fought a battle. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. In the car, before starting the engine, she sent a message to Graham. "Survived, they want to meet you, formal dinner at their place." The response came while she was driving back. She read it at the first red light. "So it's official. I'm meeting the in-laws. Say when and I'll be there. Suit and tie if needed." Elise laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I think we've reached that stage, and yes, suit would be good. My mum is traditional." "Understood. I'll impress. Promise." As she drove through the familiar streets towards her flat, Elise thought about how everything was changing so quickly. 6 months ago, she could barely hold a conversation with a man without stammering. Now she was planning to introduce a boyfriend to her parents. A boyfriend with a lifetime of experiences she'd never had. But for the first time, that didn't seem quite so frightening. It seemed right. Friday arrived too quickly. Elise spent the entire week with her stomach in knots, alternating between paralyzing anxiety and nervous excitement. Graham, on the other hand, seemed relaxed when she picked him up from his flat at 6 in the evening. "How are you so calm?" Elise asked as she drove, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. Graham, impeccable in a navy suit that made him look even more serious and trustworthy, smiled sideways. "Who says I'm calm? I'm just good at hiding it." "Really?" "Elise, I'm about to meet the parents of the woman I—" He paused and she felt her heart accelerate. "The woman who's very important to me. Of course I'm nervous." The near confession hung between them. Elise wanted to ask what he was going to say, but the traffic demanded her attention. When she finally parked in front of her parents' house, she took a deep breath. "Last chance to run," she joked, but her voice trembled. Graham took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm not going anywhere, let's go." The door opened before they could ring the bell. Helen must have been waiting near the window. She was impeccable, in a discreet but elegant dress, her hair pulled back in a bun. "Good evening," she greeted, and Elise noticed her mother's voice was polite but tense. "You must be hungry. Come in, please." Graham extended his hand. "Mrs. Morgan, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Graham Bennett." The handshake was brief, but Helen examined Graham from head to toe in a way Elise knew well. She was cataloguing every detail to analyze later. "Come in, Graham," Helen said, stepping back from the door. "My husband is in the sitting room." David was standing beside the armchair, also dressed formally. The room was arranged in a way Elise only saw on special occasions. The sofa cushions perfectly positioned, the magazines aligned on the coffee table. Even the television had been polished. "Mr. Morgan," Graham greeted, extending his hand again. "It's an honor." The handshake between the two men lasted a bit longer, and Elise saw her father assessing Graham with that clinical look he used for everything. "Please sit," David indicated the sofa. "You can drop the formality, we're simple folk here." They settled down, Elise beside Graham on the sofa, her parents in the armchairs opposite. The silence that followed was uncomfortable until Helen stood up. "I'll check on dinner. Elise, come help me." Elise recognized the order disguised as a request. She looked at Graham, who just nodded slightly, and followed her to the kitchen. As soon as they were alone, Helen turned, whispering intensely, "He's handsome and seems polite." "Mum!" Elise felt her cheeks flush. "I'm just saying." Helen stirred a pot unnecessarily. "But he's still much older than you. You notice it when you're standing side by side. 12 years isn't that much." "It's still 12 years," Helen retorted. 12 years of experiences you don't have. When you were in first form, he was starting sixth form. And when you were at university, Dad was finishing his postgraduate degree," Elise counter-argued. "You said it was different yourself, but was it?" Helen fell silent, then sighed. "Your father was more immature. I was old for my age. With you two, it's the opposite. You've always been so young for your years." The words hurt more than Elise expected. "Yeah, Mum, I know I'm behind in everything. Thanks for the reminder." "That's not what I meant." Helen set down the spoon. "Elise, you've always been careful. Always thought things through before doing anything, and now you're throwing yourself headfirst into something so complex." "Because it's worth it," Elise interrupted. "For the first time in my life, Something is worth the fear. The two stared at each other, and finally Helen nodded. Then let me get to know this man properly. Let me see if he really deserves you. They returned to the sitting room carrying serving dishes of food. David and Graham were talking about architecture. Apparently David had an interest in interior design that Elise had never known about. The firm where I work is renovating the entire building, David was saying. I think they're going to ruin it. These young architects today don't respect the original structure. I completely agree, Graham responded, and there was genuine animation in his voice. Modern architecture sometimes forgets that we have to dialogue with the past, not erase it. During dinner, the conversation flowed more naturally than Elise had expected. Graham spoke about his work, about how he'd started in construction before managing to qualify in architecture. He mentioned his daughter, Piper, casually, and how she was in year 3. It must be difficult, Helen commented, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. Balancing work and raising a daughter. Does her mother help? A brief silence. Graham cleared his throat. My ex-wife has shared custody, but she has some personal issues. It ends up that Piper spends more time with me. Issues? Helen pressed, and Elise felt like kicking her mother under the table. Mum, she warned. But Graham lightly touched Elise's hand, signaling it was all right. My ex-wife was diagnosed with bipolar disorder a few years ago. It was one of the reasons for the divorce. She refused to accept treatment. She's better now, but there are still ups and downs. The raw honesty silenced the table. Helen looked at David, who had a thoughtful expression. That must be very difficult for the girl, David commented softly. It is, Graham agreed. Piper is incredible considering everything, but I know she carries more than she should for her age. And how is she coping with... Helen gestured vaguely between Graham and Elise. With this. Graham and Elise exchanged a glance. She's getting used to it, Graham said carefully. At first it was difficult, but Elise has been very patient. I try, Elise murmured, moving the food around her plate. So you're brilliant with her, Graham said firmly. Last week when you helped Piper with the science project, she wouldn't stop talking about it afterwards. Elise felt warmth in her chest at the memory. Piper had to make a bicarbonate and vinegar volcano, and Elise had spent an entire afternoon helping to build, paint, and decorate it. In the end, Piper had smiled at her for the first time without reservations. It must be strange, Helen said, looking at Elise, entering a child's life like that, taking on a responsibility that isn't yours. Mum, Elise protested again. No, she's right, Graham intervened. It is strange. And it's not fair to ask that of someone as young as Elise. I know that. But I want to, Elise said, surprising herself with the vehemence. Piper isn't a burden. She's part of Graham, and I don't want him by halves. Helen blinked, and Elise saw something soften in her mother's face. You really care for him? It wasn't a question. I really do, Elise confirmed, looking at Graham. Very much. The rest of dinner passed with less tension. When they served dessert, a trifle that was Helen's speciality, the conversation was already lighter, even with some laughter. But when it was time to leave, as they stood at the door, Helen grabbed Graham's arm. You seem to be a good man, she said, and there was a seriousness in her voice that made everyone pay attention. But my daughter has never been hurt because she's never allowed herself to feel anything deeply. If you're going to be the first, I need you to be careful. She's more fragile than she seems. Mum! Elise felt her face burn with embarrassment, but Graham looked directly into Helen's eyes. I know, and I promise I'll take care of her, not perfectly because I'm human and I'll make mistakes, but I'll try every single day. Helen nodded, satisfied. That's all I can ask. In the car, already far from the house, Elise finally let out the air she didn't know she'd been holding. Sorry about my mum. She's intense. She loves you, Graham said simply, and she's afraid. I understand perfectly. If someone looked at Piper the way I look at you, I'd ask 1,000 questions too. Elise drove in silence for a few blocks. You almost said something earlier, in the car before we got there. Graham was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a low voice, he said, I was going to say you're the woman I love. The car nearly took a wrong turn. Elise braked at the first safe place she found, stopping completely. She turned to face him. "What?" Graham had that vulnerable expression she rarely saw. "I love you, Elise. I know it's early. I know you might not be ready to hear this, but—" She kissed him, interrupting the words with her mouth. It was a desperate kiss, full of everything she didn't know how to say. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "Me too," Elise whispered against his lips. "I love you too, and it scares me so much." "I know." Graham ran his hand through her hair. "It scares me too, but we're in this together, remember?" Elise nodded, feeling tears burn her eyes. For the first time, it wasn't fear of the tears, it was relief, it was happiness, it was love. The weeks following the dinner were the happiest of Elise's life. Graham became a constant presence in her routine. Good morning messages that arrived before her alarm went off, stolen lunches between work meetings, evenings watching films on his sofa whilst Piper slept in the next room. But happiness had an expiry date that neither of them anticipated. It was a Tuesday when Graham received the call. Elise was at his flat, helping Piper with maths homework at the kitchen table, when his mobile rang. She saw his expression change when he looked at the screen. Surprise, then something that looked like cautious hope. "I need to take this," he said, already standing up and going to the bedroom. "It's important." Elise and Piper exchanged a look. The girl who in recent days had started to open up more shrugged. "Must be work. He always gets like that when it's about work." But when Graham returned 15 minutes later, there wasn't excitement on his face. There was conflict. "Elise, can I speak with you for a minute?" Piper caught the seriousness immediately. "I'll watch telly in my room," she announced, collecting her notebooks. As soon as they were alone, Graham sat heavily on the sofa. Elise joined him, her heart already beginning to race with nervousness. "What is it?" Graham ran his hand over his face, a gesture of tiredness she was beginning to recognize. "Remember I told you about that project? The residential complex I'd been trying to get for years." Elise nodded. It was a big, ambitious project that could define Graham's career as an architect. "They got approval. They want to start in 2 months. But that's brilliant," Elise exclaimed, confused by his lack of enthusiasm. "It's in Brighton." The words fell between them like stones. Elise felt her stomach turn. "Brighton," she repeated. "Sussex." 200 miles from here, Graham confirmed, looking at his own hands. "The project should last 2 years. They want me to live there, overseeing personally." The silence that followed was dense. Elise processed the information, each implication unfolding in her mind like dominoes falling. 2 years, she murmured. "It's the opportunity of my career," Graham said, and there was pain in his voice. "It's everything I've worked to achieve. But you have Piper," Elise completed, "and her mother is here. And you're here," Graham added, finally looking at her. "And for the first time in years I have something that's worth more than any project." Elise felt tears burn but held them back. "You have to go." "No, I don't," Graham retorted. "I can refuse. And you'll regret it for the rest of your life," Elise said with a conviction she didn't know where it came from. "You'll look at me in 5-10 years and wonder what if. And I don't want to be the reason you miss this." "Elise—" "No," she interrupted him, standing up. She needed movement, distance to think. "You've worked your whole life for this. You can't throw it away." Graham also stood up, approaching her. "And you? What are we going to do?" "I don't know," Elise admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know." Over the following days, the news settled between them like a shadow. They talked about other things, tried to maintain normality, but there was always that unspoken tension hovering. It was Piper who forced the conversation they needed to have. "Are you leaving?" she asked Graham directly during dinner, 3 days after the call. Her voice was small, but firm. "I heard you talking on the phone with Granny." Graham closed his eyes briefly. "I haven't decided yet, sweetheart." "But is it true you might have to go far away?" "Yes," he admitted. "It's true." Piper looked at Elise, then back at her father. "And is Elise going with you?" The question caught both of them off guard. Elise froze with her fork in the air. "I don't know, Piper," Graham said carefully. "Why not?" the girl asked, and there was a childish logic in her voice that was impossible to argue against. If you love each other, shouldn't she go with you? Elise felt Graham's gaze on her, but couldn't return it. The idea of moving to another city, leaving everything behind, the job it took years to get, friends, family, it was terrifying. It's not that simple, darling, Graham explained. Elise has her own life here. Work, family. But if you stay apart, it won't be the same, Piper insisted, and there were tears in her eyes now. It'll be like when you and Mum separated. Everything will change. The child stood up from the table and ran to her room. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the flat. Graham sighed deeply. She's right, you know. About what? About everything changing. He looked at Elise. Long-distance relationships are difficult, especially when we're only just beginning. So what are you saying? Elise felt panic begin to rise. That we should break up? No, Graham went to her, taking her hands. That's not it. But we need to be honest. 200 miles, 2 years. You're just starting your career. I can't ask you to abandon everything. But you're abandoning everything here, Elise pointed out. It's not the same. My work is mobile. I can do architecture anywhere. Your agency, your clients, everything is here. Elise pulled her hands back, crossing her arms. So you've already decided you're going to accept? Graham was silent for too long. I think I need to. If I don't go now, I'll regret it. And that bitterness, that what if, will poison everything between us eventually. The tears Elise had been holding finally fell. So it's over? Just like that? It doesn't have to be over, Graham said, but there was doubt in his voice. We could try to make it work. Weekend visits, video calls. You don't believe that, Elise accused, reading between the lines. You think it won't work. I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty hurt more than a lie. I wish I could be certain. I wish I could promise that yes. But I've seen this happen before, Elise. Distance erodes even the strongest relationships. Elise wiped the tears away angrily. So that's it? You're leaving and... What? We wait and see what happens? Or you come with me? The words hung in the air. Elise blinked, processing. What? Come with me, Graham repeated. And now there was an intensity in his eyes. I know it's mad. I know it's asking too much. But what if you came? Brighton has design agencies, has a market. You could start fresh there. Start fresh, Elise echoed, incredulous. Leave everything I've built here, my family, my friends, my flat, my job, and move to a city I don't know for a relationship that's less than a year old. Put like that, it sounded completely insane. I know it sounds mad, Graham said, but thinking about it, why is it so mad? People move for work all the time. Why not for love? Because it's different, Elise almost shouted. I barely had the courage to tell you I'd never dated anyone. And now you want me to move cities, leave everything. Graham, I'm not like that. I'm not adventurous or brave. I'm careful. I'm scared. So you're not scared, Graham argued. You're the bravest person I know. You opened your heart even with fear. Allowed yourself to feel for the first time. That's courage. That's different, Elise insisted. Is it? Graham challenged. Or are you just frightened again of taking another step? The accusation stung. Elise stepped back as if she'd been physically pushed. That's not fair, she whispered. Graham ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident. You're right, I'm sorry, it's not fair, none of this is fair. They stood there, separated by just a few steps, but feeling like it was an abyss. I need to think, Elise finally said. I need time. How much time? I don't know, a few days, a week, I don't know, Graham. He nodded, defeated. All right, I understand. Elise grabbed her bag, her hands shaking. At the door, she turned one last time. When do you need to give an answer? About the project? 2 weeks, Graham responded. Then I'll give you an answer before that, Elise promised, though she had no idea how she'd reach one. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded final. Elise spent the next 3 days in a fog. She went to work, sat in front of the computer, moved the mouse without really seeing what she was doing. Her colleagues noticed something was wrong, but she deflected questions with vague smiles and excuses of headaches. On the 4th night, her flatmate Margot finally confronted her. She found Elise sitting on the sitting room sofa, staring at the wall, a tub of melted ice cream forgotten beside her. "Right, enough," Margot said, grabbing the remote and switching off the telly that Elise wasn't even watching. "Tell me what's going on." And Elise told her. Everything. Graham's job offer, the move to Brighton, the invitation for her to go with him. Margot listened in silence, her eyes widening progressively. "Bloody hell," she finally said when Elise finished. "That's intense." "I know," Elise murmured, hugging a cushion. "And are you considering going?" "I don't know, maybe, probably not, I haven't a clue." The words came out in a rushed jumble. Margot sat down beside her. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but can I ask you some questions?" Elise nodded. "Do you love him?" "Yes," the answer came without hesitation. "Can you imagine yourself without him?" Elise closed her eyes. The truth was she couldn't anymore. Graham had become part of her routine, her daily life. The idea of going back to how things were before him seemed grey and empty. "No," she admitted in a low voice. "Then what's the problem?" "The problem?" Elise turned to face her. "Margot, he wants me to give up everything. My job, my family, you, everything. And move to a city I've never even visited for a bloke I've known less than a year." "Yes," Margot agreed calmly. "That's exactly what he's asking. But let me ask you something else. If you stay and he goes, will you regret it?" The question echoed in the silence of the flat. Elise thought about waking up every morning knowing Graham was 200 miles away. Thought about empty weekends, text messages that would never really replace his presence. Thought about what it would be like seeing Piper grow up through photos, not in person. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll regret it." "And if you go and it doesn't work out? If you break up after a few months and you're stuck in Brighton alone?" "I'll regret that too," Elise admitted. "Then it's a question of choosing which regret you'd rather live with," Margot concluded. "Having tried and failed or never having tried at all." Elise looked at her friend, processing the words. "When did you get so wise?" Margot laughed. "Therapy, mate. Worth every penny." Later that night, lying in bed, Elise picked up her mobile and opened the conversation with Graham. He'd sent messages every day, nothing pressuring for an answer, just small, "thinking of you," and "hope you're well." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed and deleted several versions of messages before finally writing, "Can we talk tomorrow, in person?" The response came almost instantly. "Of course. My place or yours?" "Meet me at the cafe where we met. 7 p.m. I'll be there." The cafe was moderately busy for a Thursday evening. Elise arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a tea she had no intention of drinking, and sat near the window. Graham arrived exactly at 7. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, his hair a bit more disheveled than usual. When his eyes met Elise's, there was cautious hope in them. "Hi," he said, sitting down opposite her. "Hi," Elise responded, her fingers nervously playing with the cup. "You ordered tea," Graham observed with a small smile. "You hate tea." "I know," Elise admitted. "I couldn't concentrate enough to decide what I really wanted." Graham nodded, understanding. They sat in silence for a moment, just looking at each other across the small table. "I've thought a lot," Elise began, her voice trembling but determined. "About everything. About what you're asking. About what I want. About us." Graham leaned forward, completely attentive. "And?" "And I realized I'm scared," Elise continued. "Very scared. Of moving, of leaving everything, of risking so much on something so new." She saw the hope in his eyes waver, and quickly added, "But I also realized I'm more scared of losing you, of waking up a year from now and realizing I let the best thing that ever happened to me slip away because I was too frightened to risk it." Graham said nothing, waiting for her to finish. "So I'll go," Elise said, and the words came out in a sigh. "I'll go to Brighton with you." For a moment, Graham just stared at her, as if unable to process the words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the genuine, luminous smile she loved. "You will?" he repeated, as if needing confirmation. "I will," Elise confirmed, and felt tears begin to fall. But this time they were tears of relief, not fear. "But with some conditions." "Whatever you want," Graham said immediately. First, I'm going to look for work there. I don't want to be financially dependent on you. I need to have my own career, my own space. I completely agree, Graham nodded. Second, if in 6 months I'm miserable, if I can't adapt, we need to reassess. I don't want to be trapped in a situation that makes me unhappy just because I've already moved. Fair, Graham agreed. And third, Elise took a deep breath, you have to promise that if this doesn't work out, if we break up, you'll help me get back. You won't leave me alone there. Graham reached his hand across the table, taking Elise's. I promise. All 3 things. But Elise, I need you to know, I'm not just asking you to come with me. I'm asking you to build a life with me. Properly. Elise's heart raced. What do you mean? Graham took something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Elise's world stopped. I was going to wait, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. But if we're doing this, let's do it properly. Elise, I love you, and I know it's quick, I know it's frightening, but will you marry me? Elise couldn't breathe. The ring sparkled under the cafe lights, and she could feel other people's eyes turning to look, noticing the moment unfolding. Graham, she whispered, this is mad. I know, he admitted, completely mad. But it's the best kind of mad I've ever experienced. Elise looked at the ring, at Graham, back at the ring, thought about all the reasons she should say no. They barely knew each other. Everything was happening too fast. She'd never even lived with anyone before. But then she thought about how she felt when she was with him. Safe, loved, seen. Yes, she said, and the smile that spread across her face hurt. It was so big. Yes, I want to marry you. Graham practically leapt from his chair to kiss her, and the entire cafe exploded in applause. When he put the ring on her finger, both their hands were shaking so much it took 3 attempts. But finally it was there, a commitment in the form of metal and stone. And as Elise looked at the ring on her hand, intertwined with Graham's, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was diving headfirst into something without knowing where she'd land. And it was all right. Telling the family was harder than Elise anticipated. She arranged a lunch at her parents' house the following Sunday, asking that Graham stay out of this first conversation. She needed to do this alone. Helen opened the door with a smile that died as soon as she saw the expression on her daughter's face. What's happened? She asked immediately, pulling Elise inside. David was in the kitchen, finishing preparing lunch. When he saw Elise enter, he frowned. You both need to sit down, Elise said, her voice firmer than she felt. 5 minutes later, seated at the kitchen table with untouched coffees in front of them, Elise gathered all the courage she possessed. Graham's received a job offer in Brighton, she began. It's the career opportunity of his life. It'll last 2 years. Helen and David exchanged a look. And? David encouraged gently. And I'm going with him, Elise released in one breath. We're getting married. The silence that followed was absolute. Elise could hear the tick-tock of the clock on the wall, the distant hum of the fridge. You're what? Helen finally managed to say, her voice rising with each word. Getting married? Elise, you've been together less than a year. 10 months, Elise corrected as if it made a difference. 10 months? Helen stood up abruptly, the chair scraping on the floor. You've known this man for 10 months and you're going to marry him? And move to another city? Have you lost your mind? Helen, David tried to calm her, but she ignored him. You've barely left home properly, Helen continued, gesticulating dramatically. Never truly lived on your own, never paid all your own bills, never lived. And now you're going to jump straight to marriage and moving cities? I know it seems mad, Elise said, trying to keep her voice calm. But I love him and he loves me. Love! Helen practically spat the word. Love doesn't pay the bills, Elise. Love doesn't guarantee you won't regret it in 6 months when you're alone in a strange city without a job. I'm going to look for work there, Elise argued. I've already started sending my CV. To agencies you don't know in a city you've never visited. Helen was pacing back and forth now. And if you don't get anything, and if the marriage doesn't work out, you'll be stuck there with nothing. Helen, calm down. David finally intervened firmly. He turned to Elise. Your mother's exaggerating, but she's not completely wrong. It's a big decision, love. Very big. I know, Dad, Elise responded, feeling tears begin to form. Do you think I don't know? I'm terrified. But if I don't go, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And if you go and regret it, Helen retorted, doesn't that regret count? It does, Elise admitted. But I'd rather regret having tried than never having tried at all. David studied his daughter for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled a small, sad smile. Does she remind you of anyone? He asked Helen. His wife turned to him, confused. What are you talking about? Remember when we met? When your parents said I was too old? That you were throwing your life away by marrying me? Helen froze. That was different. Was it? David challenged gently. Or have you just forgotten the fear you felt? The uncertainty? Your parents didn't speak to you for 6 months after the wedding. Elise blinked, surprised. She'd never heard this story. Helen sat down slowly, as if her legs wouldn't support her anymore. But we were different. We were more mature. You were 21, David reminded her. 3 years younger than Elise is now, and I was almost a stranger to your family. But it worked out, Helen whispered. Yes, David agreed. It worked out. Because we decided to make it work, just like Elise and Graham will have to decide. Helen looked at her daughter, and Elise saw a whirlwind of emotions pass across her face. Fear, anger, sadness, and finally, reluctantly, acceptance. Are you sure? Helen asked, and her voice was broken. Absolutely sure. No, Elise answered honestly. I'm not sure about anything, but I'm sure I want to try. Helen closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, there were tears in them. Then I can't stop you, she said, even though I want to, even though every part of me is screaming to lock you in your room until you change your mind. Elise stood up and went to her mother, embracing her. Helen held her daughter tightly. I'm going to miss you so much, Helen sobbed. My baby going away. It's not forever, Elise murmured. It's only 2 years, and I'll visit. It won't be the same, Helen said, but her voice was calmer now. Nothing will be. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, embraced in the middle of the kitchen whilst David watched with moist eyes. In 2 months, Elise answered. Before we move. 2 months, Helen repeated, incredulous. There won't be time to plan anything properly. We don't want anything big, Elise explained. Just close family and a few friends. Something simple. Helen made a sound that was half laugh, half cry. Simple, of course, because everything about this is simple. But whilst saying this, Elise saw her mother already beginning to make mental plans, and in a strange way that comforted her. Some things never changed. Telling the team at work was equally difficult. Elise asked for a meeting with her boss, Charles, on Monday morning. I'm engaged, she began, and saw the smile form on his face. Congratulations, that's wonderful news. And I'm moving to Brighton in 2 months. The smile faltered. Ah, so I'll need to hand in my notice, Elise continued, each word hurting. She'd worked so hard to get this job to prove her worth. Charles leaned back in his chair, processing. Is there nothing we can do to convince you to stay? Elise shook her head. It's where my fiancé is going to be, where our life is going to be. I understand, Charles said, though he clearly didn't like it. Well, we'll miss you. You're one of the best designers we have. The words warmed Elise's heart, but also made her question again whether she was making the right choice. She was abandoning security, recognition, a job she loved. But on the other hand, she was gaining love, adventure, a new life. It had to be worth it. It needed to be. The following weeks were a blur of planning. Elise discovered that getting married in 2 months was possible, but only if you gave up any perfectionism. Helen took control of the planning, and Elise was grateful for it. She had 1,000 other things to worry about. Looking for a flat in Brighton from a distance was stressful. Graham made a quick trip to view some options, and they did video calls whilst he walked through the spaces. This one has a nice balcony, Graham showed, turning his mobile camera. and it's near Piper's school. Is it very expensive? Elise asked, making notes. A bit above budget, but I can talk to the landlord. They eventually found a 2-bedroom flat in a family neighborhood. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Elise also had her first job interview via Skype with an agency in Brighton. It went well, she thought, but it was hard to know without being there in person. They'll hire you, Graham assured her afterwards when she rang in a panic. You're brilliant at what you do. You have to say that, Elise murmured. You're my fiancé. I say it because it's true, he corrected, and because I've witnessed your work. Any agency would be lucky to have you. Piper was having difficulty with the move too. One night, when Elise was at Graham's flat helping to pack things, the girl appeared in the bedroom doorway, clutching her teddy bear. What if I don't make friends there? She asked in a small voice. Elise sat on the bed, patting the space beside her. Piper came and sat down, resting her head on Elise's shoulder. You'll make friends, Elise said with certainty. You're clever, funny, and really cool. The children will love you. What if they don't? Then those children aren't cool enough for you, Elise responded, making Piper laugh a little. But it'll be all right. I promise. Are you scared too? Piper asked, looking up. Elise could have lied, could have pretended she was confident and secure, but she decided on honesty. Yes, she admitted. Very scared. It's a new city, new people, everything new. But you're going anyway. I am, Elise confirmed, because sometimes the best things in life are on the other side of fear. Piper processed this. Dad said something similar. Your dad is a wise man, Elise smiled. He loves you loads, Piper said suddenly. I heard him telling Granny on the phone. He said you're the best thing that happened to him. Elise's heart squeezed. He's the best thing that happened to me too. And me? Piper asked in a timid voice. Am I part of that best thing too? Elise pulled the girl into a tight embrace. You're one of the best parts, Piper. You always were. And in that moment, embraced with the daughter of the man she was going to marry, in a room full of moving boxes, Elise felt that despite all the fear, despite all the uncertainty, she was exactly where she should be. The wedding day dawned with a perfect blue sky, not a cloud in sight. Elise woke early at her parents' house where she'd spent the night, a tradition Helen insisted on keeping. It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony, her mother had said firmly, and Elise didn't have the energy to argue. Now, looking at herself in the mirror, whilst the makeup artist applied the finishing touches, Elise barely recognized the woman reflected. The dress was simple but elegant, without frills, exactly as she wanted. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun with some loose strands framing her face. You look beautiful, Margot said, appearing in the bedroom doorway. As maid of honor, she was impeccable in a pale blue dress. I'm very scared, Elise admitted. Scared of what? Of getting married or of everything that comes after? Both, Elise answered honestly. What if I don't know how to be a good wife? What if I don't know how to do this? Margot sat down beside her on the bed. Nobody knows how to be a good spouse before getting married, Elise. We learn together. You and Graham will figure it out together. Helen entered the room at that moment, already dressed for the ceremony, and stopped when she saw her daughter. Good God, she whispered, her eyes instantly filling with tears. You're so beautiful. Mum, don't cry now, Elise pleaded. You'll ruin my makeup. Don't tell me what to do, Helen responded, but she was laughing through the tears. It's a mother's right to cry at her daughter's wedding. She approached, taking Elise's hands. I know I haven't been the most supportive, and I'm sorry for that, but you need to know I only want your happiness. I know, Mum. Elise squeezed her mother's hands. And I'm going to be happy. I promise to try. This man better make you happy, Helen said with a fierceness that made Elise laugh, or he'll have to deal with me. The ceremony was in a small hired garden, decorated simply with white flowers and discreet arrangements. There were perhaps 50 people, family and close friends, exactly as Elise wanted. When it was time to enter, Elise took her father's arm and took a deep breath. I don't have to do this if you don't want to, David murmured quietly. We can still escape through the back door. Elise laughed, nervous, tempting, but no. I want this. Then let's go give you away to the man who stole my baby, David said, but there was tenderness in his voice. The music began to play and the doors opened, and there was Graham. He was at the end of the aisle in an impeccable suit, with Piper beside him also dressed up in a pink dress as Flower Girl. But Elise only had eyes for him, for the way his eyes widened when he saw her, for how he passed his hand over his face, clearly moved. Each step towards him seemed simultaneously too fast and not fast enough. When she finally reached the altar and David placed her hand in Graham's, she felt the firmness of his touch and knew she'd made the right decision. "You look stunning," Graham whispered, so low only she heard. "You too," she whispered back. The ceremony passed in a blur. Elise heard the celebrant's words, said her vows with a voice that trembled but was clear, felt Graham slide the wedding ring onto her finger. When the celebrant said, "You may kiss the bride," Graham pulled her gently and kissed her with such tenderness that Elise felt tears finally fall. They were tears of joy. The reception was in a small hall decorated with fairy lights hanging from the ceiling. There was home-cooked food, music playing at a volume that allowed conversation, and an intimate atmosphere that Elise loved. During the first dance, Graham held her close and whispered, "You know I can't dance, right?" "Neither can I," Elise admitted. "Let's pretend together." And they did exactly that, moving awkwardly to the sound of the music, whilst their families watched with smiles. "We're really married," Elise murmured, still processing. "We are," Graham confirmed. "You're my wife now." "And you're my husband," Elise tested the words. "Sounds strange. Good strange or bad strange?" "Definitely good strange," she decided. Piper interrupted them, tugging at the hem of Elise's dress. "Can I dance too?" Graham immediately picked her up, and the three of them danced together, Piper laughing as she was spun between them. Watching from afar, Helen dried more tears. "They're going to be all right," she said to David. "Yes," he agreed. "They will be." Late that night, when most of the guests had already left and only close family remained, Elise sat in a chair and finally took off her shoes. "Feet hurting?" Graham asked, sitting down beside her. "Dying," she admitted. "But it was worth it." "It was a perfect day," Graham agreed. Then, more seriously, he added, "Tomorrow we start moving properly. Things are going to get real very quickly." "I know," Elise looked at him. "Are you having regrets? About marrying you?" "Not for a second," Graham responded without hesitation. "And you?" Elise thought about the question, thought about everything she was leaving behind, all the uncertainties that were to come. But then she looked at the ring on her finger, at the man beside her, at Piper sleeping in the chair on the other side of the hall. "Not for a second," she echoed, and for the first time Elise completely believed her own words. The reality of the move hit Elise like a freight train in the first week in Brighton. The flat they'd rented seemed bigger and emptier in the photos. In reality it was small, with walls that needed painting and an air conditioning unit that made strange noises. Boxes piled up in every corner, creating a cardboard labyrinth that Elise needed to navigate to go from the sitting room to the bedroom. Piper was having difficulty adapting. The new school would start in a week, and the girl oscillated between nervous excitement and crying fits, wanting to go home. "It's not home," she sobbed one night, refusing to come out of her room. "I want our real home." Graham tried to console her, but he was exhausted from the first day at the new job. It fell to Elise, who sat outside the bedroom door and talked to Piper through the wood. "I know it doesn't feel like home yet," Elise said gently, "but it will. It just needs time." "I hate it here," came the muffled response. "It's all right to hate it now," Elise responded. "I'm hating it a bit too." There was silence. Then the door opened a crack. Piper peeked out, her eyes red from crying. "You are?" "I am," Elise admitted. "I miss my mum. I miss my friends. I miss knowing where the supermarket is without using GPS." Piper opened the door wider, sitting down beside Elise on the corridor floor. "Dad said it would be an adventure." "It is," Elise agreed, "but adventures can be scary too." "I wish it wasn't scary," Piper murmured. "Me too." Elise put her arm around the girl's shoulders. "But we'll figure it out together, okay? You, Me and your dad. A team." Piper nodded, resting her head on Elise's shoulder. They stayed like that until Graham came home and found them asleep in the corridor. The following weeks were a whirlwind of trying to establish routine amidst chaos. Graham left early for work and returned late, exhausted. Elise was still without a job. The agency that interviewed her had decided to hire someone local and spent the days unpacking, cleaning, trying to transform the flat into something resembling a home. The loneliness was overwhelming. In her old life, she had work colleagues, Margot in the flat, family a short car journey away. Here, she knew no one. She spent hours on the internet looking for jobs, sending CVs, but the responses were few and far between. One afternoon, after receiving yet another rejection email, Elise simply sat on the sitting room floor and cried. She cried for the life she'd left behind, for the uncertainty of the future, for the fear of having made the biggest mistake of her life. That's how Graham found her when he arrived home from work. "Elise?" He dropped his briefcase, running to her. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I don't know if I can do this," she sobbed. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Graham pulled her into an embrace, letting her cry on his shoulder. When the sobs diminished, he gently pulled away to look into her eyes. "You're the strongest person I know," he said firmly. "You left everything you knew to start over. That's courage." "It doesn't feel like courage," Elise sniffed. "It feels like stupidity." "Sometimes it's both at the same time," Graham said with a small smile. "Come on, let's go out." "I don't feel like going out." "I know, but we're going anyway." Graham took her to the beach. It was early evening, the sun setting on the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. The sand was almost empty, just a few surfers catching the last waves of the day. They walked in silence, Elise barefoot, feeling the sand between her toes. The sound of the waves was relaxing, constant, eternal. "When my marriage ended," Graham began suddenly, "I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again. I spent 2 years alone, focusing only on Piper and work, convinced it was safer that way." Elise looked at him surprised. Graham rarely talked about that period. "And then I met you," he continued. "And you were so scared, so closed off. But you decided to risk it anyway, decided to give me a chance. And I thought, if she can be brave, I can too." "I don't feel brave now," Elise admitted. "Because the thing about courage," Graham stopped, turning to face her, "is that it doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. And you're doing it. You're here, trying, fighting. That's all I can ask." Tears returned to Elise's eyes, but this time they were different, lighter. "What if I can't find a job? What if we run out of money? What if everything works out?" Graham interrupted. "What if you find an even better job? What if Piper adapts and is happy here? What if a year from now we look back and see it was the best decision we made?" "You always have answers for everything," Elise murmured. "I don't," Graham admitted. "I just have hope, and you, and that's been enough so far." They stayed on the beach until it got completely dark, sitting in the sand, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky. 2 days later, Elise received a call. It was from a small agency that urgently needed a freelance designer, an important client, tight deadline. "Can you start tomorrow?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes," Elise responded, perhaps too quickly. "Absolutely, yes." The work was temporary, but it was something. It was a start. That night, when she told Graham and Piper during dinner, the girl jumped from her chair and ran to hug her. "You did it!" Piper shouted. "I knew you would!" The simple faith of the child made Elise's heart squeeze. If Piper could believe in her, perhaps she could too. But the happiness was brief. A week later, Piper came home from school in tears. A girl in the new class had mocked her for being an outsider, for not knowing the songs that played on the local radio, for her slightly different accent. "I hate it here," she shouted, locking herself in her room again. "I want to go back. I want my real friends." Graham was in an important meeting at work. Elise was alone to deal with the situation. She sat outside the door like she'd done before. "Piper, can I come in?" Silence. "I'm coming in anyway, okay?" Elise carefully opened the door. Piper was curled up on the bed, hugging her teddy. Do you know what I did in my first week at a new school? Elise asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Piper didn't respond, but didn't send her away either. I tripped in the corridor and dropped all my books, in front of everyone, and they laughed, a lot. Piper peeked over the teddy. Really? Really, Elise confirmed. And I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. What did you do? I cried in the loo during break, Elise admitted, and thought about asking my mum to change my school. But do you know what happened the next day? Piper shook her head. That girl who saw me fall offered to help with the maths homework, and we became friends. Best friends, actually. Margot, who you met at the wedding. Your maid of honor? Exactly, Elise smiled. And do you know why she came to talk to me? Because I seemed lost and alone, and she knew that feeling. Piper processed this. Do you think someone here will want to be my friend? I'm certain of it, Elise said firmly. But sometimes it takes time, and it won't be easy, but you're strong, Piper, stronger than you think. You thought you weren't strong too, Piper remembered. But Dad said you are. Elise blinked, surprised that the girl had paid attention to that conversation. That's true, she admitted. So shall we make a deal? We both try to be brave together. When one of us falters, the other helps. Team, remember. Piper thought for a moment, then held out her pinky. Pinky promise? Elise intertwined her pinky with the girl's. Pinky promise. But even with this small progress, the tension in the flat continued to grow. 2 months after the move, the cracks in Elise and Graham's marriage began to show. Graham was increasingly absent. The project he was coordinating was behind schedule, and he worked late every night, coming home too exhausted for any real conversation. Elise, in turn, had managed to transform the temporary freelance work into a more permanent position, but the salary was significantly lower than what she'd earned before. The bills were tight, and she found herself constantly worried about money in a way she'd never experienced. Piper was improving at school, but there were still difficult days, and when the girl had bad days, it was Elise who dealt with the consequences, not Graham. The tension exploded on a Friday night. Graham had promised to come home early for dinner, a special dinner Elise had planned to celebrate their 3-month wedding anniversary. She'd made an effort, cooking his favorite recipe, setting the table. 7 o'clock passed. Then 8, 9. The food went cold. Piper went to bed. Elise sat alone at the set table, feeling anger grow. When Graham finally arrived at 10:30, he found Elise washing the dishes aggressively. Sorry, he said immediately, seeing the set table, the untouched food. The project, there was a problem, and there's always a problem, Elise interrupted him, without turning around. There's always an excuse. It's not an excuse, it's reality, Graham retorted, exhaustion making his voice sharp. I can't just leave when I want. I have responsibilities. And I don't? Elise turned, finally looking at him. Or do my responsibilities not count because they don't pay as much as yours? Graham blinked, surprised by the bitterness. What are you talking about? About the fact that you act like I'm here just playing at working. The words came out in a flood that Elise didn't even know she'd been holding. Like my work isn't important because it's not a big architectural project. I never said that. You don't need to say it, Elise shouted, then controlled herself, remembering Piper was sleeping. In a lower but no less intense voice, she continued, It's implicit in every time you cancel plans because work is more important. In every time I have to deal with Piper alone because you're too busy. In every time you knew what it would be like. Graham interrupted her, frustration evident. I warned you about the project, about the hours. You agreed to this. I agreed to move together, Elise shot back, not to raise Piper alone whilst you work. Alone, Graham's voice rose. You're not doing this alone. I'm here. Are you? Elise challenged. Because from my perspective, you only turn up to sleep, and sometimes not even that. Graham ran his hand over his face, clearly exhausted. What do you want from me, Elise? I'm doing the best I can. I work hard to support this family, so you have the luxury of choosing a job that pays less. The silence that followed was absolute. Elise felt as if she'd been slapped. Luxury? She repeated, her voice dangerously calm. You think it's a luxury? I left a job I loved, that paid well, to come here, to be with you. And now you're saying it's a luxury? Graham realized his mistake immediately. That's not what I meant. Do you know what? Elise interrupted him, taking off her apron. I'm tired. Tired of fighting against this city. Tired of feeling alone even though I'm married. Tired of everything. Elise, wait. But she was already going to the bedroom, closing the door harder than necessary. Graham stood alone in the kitchen, looking at the remains of the special dinner they'd never eaten, and realized he'd ruined everything. The following days were tense. Elise and Graham barely talked, communicating through short messages about logistics. Who would pick up Piper? Who would buy milk? It was Piper who finally forced the issue. On Wednesday morning, she refused to go to school. You're fighting, she accused, sitting at the breakfast table with her arms crossed, and I'm not leaving here until you talk properly. Elise and Graham looked at each other, embarrassed. We're not fighting, sweetheart, Graham tried. Liar! Piper banged her fist on the table. You don't even look at each other. And Elise isn't even sleeping in your room. She's on the sofa. The child's observation cut deeper than any accusation could. Elise felt her cheeks flush, ashamed that Piper had noticed. Piper, these are adult things, Graham began. I'm not stupid, the girl interrupted him, and there were tears in her eyes now. I saw this happen before, with you and Mum. It started like this. You stopped talking, stopped looking at each other, and then you separated. The tears flowed freely now. And I don't want this to happen again. I can't take it. Elise felt her heart break. She knelt beside Piper's chair, ignoring the discomfort between her and Graham. Piper, look at me, she said gently, waiting until the girl met her eyes. Your dad and I are having difficulties, that's true. But it's not the same as what happened with your mum. We're going to sort this out. Promise? Piper sobbed. Elise looked at Graham over Piper's head. He was pale, clearly shaken by his daughter's reaction. His eyes met Elise's, and in them she saw fear, regret, but also determination. I promise, Elise said, and felt Graham nod behind her. But we need you to go to school today, okay? Your dad and I are going to talk properly tonight. Piper wiped her face with the back of her hand. Talk properly? Not just pretend everything's fine? Talk properly, Graham confirmed, his voice hoarse with emotion. That night, after Piper went to bed, Elise and Graham sat on the sofa, the same sofa where she'd been sleeping for the past 3 days. The silence between them was heavy, but no longer hostile. It was a silence of two people trying to find the right words. I'm sorry, Graham said finally, for the comment about luxury. It was cruel and unfair. Thank you, Elise responded quietly. But you weren't completely wrong. I chose a job that pays less, but not because it's a luxury. It's because it was the only option I found. I know, Graham ran his hand through his hair, and I've been a terrible partner. You're right. I throw everything on you, Piper, the house, the responsibilities, whilst I use work as an excuse to hide. Elise blinked, surprised by the raw honesty. Why are you hiding? Graham was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a low voice, because I'm afraid of failing again. With Piper. With you. My previous marriage destroyed me, Elise. And when things start getting difficult with you, I run to work, because there I know what I'm doing. There I don't disappoint anyone. But you are disappointing, Elise said gently without cruelty. You're disappointing me and Piper by not being present. I know, Graham admitted, and there were tears in his eyes now, and I don't know how to fix it. Elise took his hand, intertwining their fingers. By starting to be here, properly, not just physically, but emotionally, I need to know we're in this together. We are, Graham said fervently. I promise. I'll talk to my boss tomorrow about balancing the hours better. And I'll stop keeping everything to myself, Elise added. When I'm overwhelmed, I need to tell you, not wait until I explode. Graham pulled her closer, embracing her for the first time in days. Elise sank into the embrace, feeling the tension finally begin to dissipate. We're not good at this yet, Graham murmured against her hair. At this couple thing. No, Elise agreed, but we'll learn. Together. And there, on the worn sofa of a flat that still didn't feel like home, they made a new commitment. not just to stay together, but to fight for the relationship, even when it got difficult, especially when it got difficult. The following weeks weren't miraculous. There wasn't an instant transformation, but there was effort. Graham started leaving work at 6, no matter how unfinished the project was. Some days were harder than others, and Elise saw the tension in his shoulders when he deliberately shut down the computer and closed his briefcase. "It'll be all right," she assured him on those nights. "The work will be there tomorrow." In return, Elise started sharing her frustrations before they accumulated. When she was overwhelmed, she said so. When she missed family, she admitted it. "I miss my mum," she confessed one night after Piper went to bed. "I wish I could just ring her and turn up for coffee." "Why don't you go visit?" Graham suggested. "Stay a few days. I'll take care of everything here." "Can you?" Elise asked, genuinely worried. "With work and Piper?" "I'll have to manage," Graham said firmly. "I can't keep depending on you for everything." And so 3 weeks after the big fight, Elise found herself on a train back to her hometown. It was only 5 days, but she anticipated them like a person in the desert anticipates water. Helen met her at the station with a hug so tight Elise could barely breathe. "Let me look at you," her mother pulled away, studying her daughter's face. "You're thinner. Are you eating properly?" "I am, Mum," Elise laughed, feeling tears prickle. "I just missed you." The next few hours were filled with conversation, updates on neighborhood gossip, and home-cooked food that Elise didn't know how much she'd missed. But it was on the second night, when they were sitting on the sitting room sofa watching a soap they always watched together, that Helen asked the question she'd clearly been holding. "How are you really?" she asked, taking her eyes off the telly to look at her daughter. "And don't give me the automatic 'I'm fine' answer." Elise considered lying, considered smiling and saying everything was perfect. But then she looked at her mother and saw genuine concern, not judgment. "It's hard," she admitted. "Harder than I expected. The move, the marriage, Piper. It's all too much. Are you regretting it?" "No," Elise answered and realized it was true. "I'm not regretting it, but it's also not the fairy tale I thought it would be." Helen laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Welcome to marriage, love. Nobody tells you it's hard work. Do you and Dad, do you fight?" "We fight," Helen admitted without hesitation. "Your father can be stubborn as a mule when he wants, and I can be intense." "Noticed," Elise murmured, making her mother laugh again. "But we know how to fight and make up," Helen continued. "That's the difference. We don't run when it gets difficult." "How do you do it?" Elise asked. "Not run?" Helen thought for a moment. "Remember that marriage is a choice you make every day, not just once at the altar. There are days I wake up and choose to love your father. Some days it's easy, others, not so much. But I choose." The words resonated with Elise. Choose. Every day. "Graham is trying," she said. "Really trying, and I am too, but I'm afraid it won't be enough." "Enough for what?" Helen challenged. "To be perfect. Love, perfect doesn't exist. What exists is two people committed to working together, and from what you tell me, you have that." Elise nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Just being able to talk honestly without pretenses already helped. Meanwhile, in Brighton, Graham was having his own journey. Taking care of Piper alone for 5 days showed exactly how much he'd been relying on Elise. The first morning was chaotic. He woke up late, Piper's uniform wasn't ready, breakfast was rushed and poorly made. "Where's Elise?" Piper asked, watching her father burn the toast for the second time. "Visiting Granny Helen," Graham answered, throwing the burnt toast in the bin. "We'll buy bread from the bakery, what do you think?" Piper seemed to consider. "Elise always makes perfect toast." "Yes, well, Elise is better than me at many things," Graham admitted, "but she deserves a break, so we're going to manage." They managed, but it wasn't graceful. Graham discovered he didn't know where Piper's favorite socks were. 3rd drawer, right side. Didn't know she had science homework. That should have been done 3 days ago. Didn't know she'd promised to bring biscuits to share at school, which they obviously didn't have. On the 4th night, after a dinner consisting of instant noodles and apples because he forgot to go to the supermarket, Graham sat on the sofa completely exhausted. Piper sat down beside him, swinging her legs that didn't reach the floor. "You miss her?" It wasn't a question. "Very much," Graham admitted. "I didn't realize how much she does until she's not here." "She does everything," Piper agreed. "Remembers things, takes care of things, takes care of me." Graham looked at his daughter, seeing wisdom in her eyes that shouldn't be there in a 9-year-old child. "I haven't been a good father lately, have I?" he asked, though the answer was already clear. Piper shrugged. "You're always tired, and always working." "That's going to change," Graham promised. "Properly this time. I'm going to be more present." "You said that before," Piper pointed out, but without cruelty. "When you and Mum were still married." The observation hurt because it was true. Graham had promised changes before and never truly implemented them. "You're right," he said, "and this time I'm going to prove it with actions, not just words." Piper studied her father for a long moment. "Okay, but if you don't, I'm going to tell Elise," and she gets scary. Graham laughed, despite everything. "Yes, she does, and it's quite frightening." "But she's never scary for long," Piper added thoughtfully. "She always talks afterwards." "Yes," Graham agreed. "She's a better person than me." "It's not about being better," Piper said with the brutal simplicity of childhood. "It's about trying." From the mouth of a 9-year-old child came the truth Graham needed to hear. When Elise returned from her visit, she found the flat in relative order. Clearly it had been cleaned in a rush before she arrived, and Graham and Piper waiting for her with a dinner that, whilst simple, had been made with care. "Welcome back," Graham said, and there was such obvious relief in his voice that Elise laughed. "Difficult?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Impossible," he admitted. "I don't know how you do everything." "Practice," Elise responded, "and lots of coffee." After Piper went to bed, Graham told her about the week, sparing no details of his failures. Elise listened with a growing smile. "So you burnt toast 3 times?" "4 if you count this morning's breakfast," Graham corrected, "and I discovered that washing machines have different settings for different clothes. Who knew?" "Literally everyone," Elise laughed. "Well, now I know too," Graham pulled her closer. "And I also know I completely underestimated what you do, and I'm sorry for that." "I accept the apology," Elise said, "but only if you promise to keep trying. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present." "Present," Graham repeated. "I can do that." And for the first time in weeks, when they went to bed that night, it was in the same room, the same bed, together. 4 months after the move, Brighton started to feel less like a strange city and more like a home under construction. Elise had finally got a permanent job at a medium-sized agency, with a decent salary and colleagues who seemed to genuinely like her. It wasn't her dream job, but it was stable and allowed her to use her creativity. Piper had made friends at school, not many, but some good ones. She brought home a girl called Ava, and the two spent the entire afternoon laughing and making some sort of art project that left the kitchen covered in glitter. "Sorry about the mess," Piper said when Elise came back from work and saw the state of the kitchen. "It's all right," Elise responded, and realized she really meant it. Mess meant Piper was happy, that she'd found a friend. That was worth a few hours of cleaning. Graham had kept his promise to be more present. There were still difficult days at work, still nights when he came back late, but they were exceptions now, not the rule. And when he noticed he was slipping back into old habits, he corrected himself. One Friday, he arrived home at 5:30, earlier than agreed. "What are you doing here?" Elise asked, surprised. "I thought we could do something as a family," Graham said. "Go to the beach, perhaps. Catch the sunset." It was a simple suggestion, but it meant a lot. Elise felt warmth in her chest. "Piper," she called, "get your jacket. We're going to the beach." They spent the afternoon on the sand, Piper building elaborate castles, whilst Elise and Graham sat close, watching the waves. "Are you happy?" Graham asked suddenly. Elise thought about the question. 4 months ago she would have hesitated, but now, "Yes," she said, and smiled when she realized it was true. "I'm becoming happy." Becoming, Graham noticed the chosen word. It's a process, Elise explained, but we're getting there. Graham kissed her temple. We really are. But life, as always, had more challenges in store. On a seemingly normal Tuesday, Graham's phone rang in the middle of dinner. It was his ex-wife. Elise saw his expression change when he answered, leaving the table to talk privately. Piper stopped eating, her eyes fixed on the door her father had gone through. It's Mum, she said, more to herself than to Elise. Seems like it, Elise agreed, trying to keep her tone light. 10 minutes later, Graham returned, and what he said changed everything. Piper's mum is going through a crisis, he explained, choosing his words carefully. The doctors recommend she be admitted for a few days to adjust her medication. Piper went pale. Is she all right? She will be, Graham assured quickly. But this means you'll be staying with us full-time for a few weeks, is that all right? Of course it's all right, Piper said, but her voice was small. After the girl went to her room, Graham sat down heavily. Was this expected? Elise asked gently. Yes and no, Graham ran his hand over his face. She'd been well for months, but bipolar disorder is like that. It has ups and downs. She'll be fine, but it'll affect Piper, Elise completed. Yes, Graham agreed. It always does. That night, Elise heard Piper crying in her room. She knocked gently on the door. Can I come in? Piper was curled up on the bed, hugging her teddy. Elise sat down beside her. I was afraid of this, Piper admitted between sobs. When we moved here, I was afraid Mum would get worse without me there. It's not your fault, Elise said firmly. Your mum's illness has nothing to do with you. But if I'd been there, it wouldn't have changed anything, Elise interrupted. Piper, look at me. You're not responsible for your mum's health. She has doctors. She has treatment. You just need to be a child. Piper sobbed harder. Sometimes I get angry at her for being like this, and then I feel bad for being angry. It's normal to be angry, Elise said softly. It's a lot for a child to carry. But you're not alone, okay? You have your dad, and you have me. Piper looked up, her eyes red. Really? Even though I'm just your stepdaughter? Elise's heart squeezed. She pulled Piper into a tight embrace. You're not just anything, she said fiercely. You're Piper. You're brilliant and brave and important, and I love you. Not because I'm married to your dad, but because you're you. It was the first time Elise had said the words aloud, and in saying them she realized they were absolutely true. At some point over the past months, this girl had completely won her heart. Piper hugged Elise back, holding tight. I love you too. You're like a second mum, the mum who's always here. They stayed like that for a long time, and when Graham passed by the door and saw them embraced, he had to wipe his own eyes before entering. The following weeks tested all of them in different ways. Piper had frequent nightmares about her mum. Graham was torn between work and being more present for his daughter. Elise was trying to balance her own job with increased needs at home. But they made it work, together. Graham took Piper to visit her mum in the psychiatric hospital, and Elise went along for support. It was difficult seeing Graham's ex-wife in that state, pale, with eyes empty from medication, but at least she was getting help. Look after my baby, the woman whispered to Elise in a moment of clarity. Please. I will, Elise promised. Always. Autumn arrived in Brighton, bringing milder temperatures and a welcome calm after the storm. 6 months had passed since the move, and life had finally found a sustainable rhythm. Piper's mum had been discharged from hospital and was stable again, religiously keeping to her treatment. The visits continued on alternate weekends, and Piper seemed calmer, knowing her mum was being properly cared for. For Elise, the agency where she worked had become more than just a job. She'd led her first major project, a complete campaign for a local sustainable products company, and the result had been so good that her boss promoted her to senior designer. Congratulations! Graham spun her in the air when she told him the news. I knew it. I knew you'd smash it. It comes with a raise too, Elise said, still processing. A good raise. Does this mean I can have that tablet for drawing? Piper asked hopefully. It means, Graham corrected with a smile, That we're going out for dinner tonight to celebrate, and perhaps, we can talk about the tablet. They went to a restaurant overlooking the sea, and Elise looked around the table, at Graham holding her hand, at Piper, who was animatedly telling them about a school project, and felt a deep peace. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights of arguing, days of doubt, moments where she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. But there had been many more moments of joy, of laughter, of love so deep it almost hurt. "What are you thinking about?" Graham asked, noticing her expression. "About how everything's changed," Elise admitted. "About who I was and who I am." "And?" Graham encouraged. "And I'm grateful I took the risk," Elise said simply, "for being brave even when I was terrified." Graham squeezed her hand. "And how do you feel about it?" "Scared sometimes," Elise said honestly, "but also fulfilled, complete in a way I never was before." But it was an unexpected call that really solidified how much Brighton had become home. Margot rang on a Saturday afternoon, excited and talking so fast Elise could barely keep up. Wait, Elise interrupted her. "You got promoted?" "Yes, and here's the best part. They're opening an office in Brighton, and I'm going to manage it. Elise, I'm moving there." Elise nearly dropped the phone. Her best friend, here? The person she missed most from her old life coming to her new life. "When?" she managed to ask. "Next month. And I was thinking, do you know anyone looking for a flatmate? Because I could use help getting settled." "No," Elise said immediately. Silence on the other end. "Oh, all right, I understand if you don't want to—" "I'm not saying no to helping you," Elise interrupted, laughing. "I'm saying you don't need a flatmate. We have a spare room." "I can't invade your space like that." "It wouldn't be an invasion," Elise insisted. It would be perfect." "Graham, what do you think?" Graham, who'd been listening to the conversation whilst trying to assemble a new bookshelf, waved enthusiastically. "He agrees," Elise announced. "Piper, would you mind sharing the flat with Margot?" "Auntie Margot, who let me wear lipstick at the wedding when nobody was looking," Piper shouted from her room. "She can live here forever." And so it was decided. Amidst laughter and plans, one more piece fell into place in the life Elise was building. When Margot arrived a month later, with 3 enormous suitcases and enough energy to light up a city, the flat instantly gained new life. "I can't believe you live 3 blocks from the beach," Margot exclaimed, throwing herself on the sofa. "Like the beach. When I want to go to the beach in London, I need to take 2 hours of traffic." "Welcome to coastal life," Elise smiled. "But I warn you, not everything's perfect. Prices are higher, everyone drives slowly, and—" "I don't care," Margot interrupted her. "I'm so happy to be here, to be near you again. 6 months was too long." Having Margot around brought a lightness Elise didn't even know was missing. They went back to having their late-night gossip sessions, now with wine on the balcony instead of hot chocolate on the old flat sofa. Margot became part of the family, having dinner with them, helping Piper with homework when Elise and Graham were busy, bringing hilarious stories from the new job. "You seem different," Margot observed one night, when they were alone on the balcony. "More light?" "I feel different," Elise admitted. "More confident, perhaps, more myself." "Marriage transformed you?" "No," Elise corrected thoughtfully. "Marriage gave me space to discover who I always was under all that fear." Margot smiled, toasting with her wineglass. "Look at you, all philosophical. The girl who was afraid to order coffee at the counter." "I'm still a bit scared," Elise laughed, "but I'm working on it." Winter brought rains that drummed on the roof and cozy nights inside. On one of those nights, with Piper sleeping and Margot having gone out with new work colleagues, Elise and Graham finally had real time alone. "You know what I realized?" Graham said, pulling Elise closer on the sofa. "We never had a proper honeymoon." "We were rather busy moving and settling," Elise reminded him. "Exactly," Graham agreed. "But the project's going well, my boss is happy, and I have accumulated holiday I need to use." "Are you suggesting—" "A week, just the 2 of us. Piper can stay with her mum, who's well now. Margot can check everything's all right. And we can go somewhere and just be a couple, without responsibilities." The idea was so tempting Elise was almost afraid to agree. "Where do you want to go?" "Let me surprise you," Graham said with a mysterious smile. 2 weeks later, Elise found herself at a small boutique hotel in the countryside, surrounded by mountains and forests. It was isolated, peaceful, perfect. "How did you find this place?" she asked in wonder, looking from the room's balcony to the valley below. "Research," Graham answered, embracing her from behind. "I wanted something special. You deserve something special." That week was magical. They walked trails in the forest, had leisurely breakfasts without any rush to be anywhere, talked about everything and nothing. It was the first time since the wedding they were just Elise and Graham, without the 1,000 responsibilities of daily life. One night, lying in bed after a candle-lit dinner, Graham traced lazy patterns on Elise's arm. "Do you remember," he began, "when you told me you'd never done that before?" Elise felt her cheeks flush even after months of marriage. "How could I forget? I was dying of embarrassment." "You didn't need to be," Graham said. "It was one of the bravest moments I've ever witnessed, being so vulnerable, so honest about your fears." "It didn't feel brave," Elise murmured. "It felt terrifying." "The best things usually are." Graham turned her to face him. "And look how far we've come. From you trembling to confess you'd never dated anyone to this, married, on a mini honeymoon, building a life together." "Sometimes I still don't believe it's real," Elise admitted. "That you're real." "I'm very real," Graham assured, kissing her gently. "And very much in love with you. Even when I burn dinner." "Especially when you burn dinner," he smiled. "Because then we order takeaway and I get an excuse not to wash up." Elise laughed, lightly hitting his chest. "Romantic." "But true," Graham pulled her closer. "Elise, you transformed my life, made me believe in love again when I thought I never could. You gave me a real family, not just a house. You gave me hope." The words touched deeply. Elise felt tears prickle, but this time they were happy tears. "You did the same for me," she whispered. "You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, that risking can be worth it, that I'm stronger than I ever believed." They kissed, and it was different from all previous kisses. It was a kiss of promise, of gratitude, of deep and true love. And Elise thought that perhaps the trembling confession she'd made so long ago wasn't about inexperience. It was about trust, and she'd chosen the right person to trust. The peace they'd built was tested in a way nobody expected. 2 months after the honeymoon, Elise started feeling strange, deep tiredness that didn't pass even with full nights of sleep. Morning sickness she initially attributed to something she'd eaten, breast tenderness that made her swap all her bras for more comfortable models. Margot was the first to notice. "You're pregnant," she declared on a Saturday morning, watching Elise refuse coffee, something she never did. "Don't be ridiculous," Elise responded automatically. "I'm on the pill." "That you forgot to take during the honeymoon," Margot reminded her. "You told me. You said it was only a few days and probably wouldn't be a problem." Elise's blood ran cold. She had forgotten. In the midst of the romance and relaxation of the trip, she'd completely forgotten. "I can't be pregnant," she whispered, panic beginning to rise. We didn't plan this." "Well, life rarely asks permission," Margot said, but her voice was gentle. "Come on, let's buy a test." 30 minutes later, Elise was locked in the bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines on the test display. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The panic was instant and overwhelming. How could she be pregnant? They'd barely settled in, were still learning to be a couple, to be a family with Piper. How could they add a baby to the equation? "Elise," Margot's voice came from the other side of the door. "Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant," Elise said, and heard how her voice sounded distant, disconnected. "Okay," Margot said calmly. "Breathe. I'll make tea. When you come out, we'll talk." But Elise couldn't move. She sat on the cold bathroom floor, the test still in her hand, whilst her brain tried to process the information. A baby. She was going to have a baby. With Graham, who already had a daughter, who'd already been through all this before. Whilst she'd never even held a newborn baby before. What did she know about being a mother? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Telling Graham was the hardest thing Elise had ever done. She waited until Piper was asleep, until Margot was in her room. Then, with shaking hands, she asked him to sit down. "What is it?" Graham asked, immediate worry on his face. "Are you all right? Did something happen at work?" "I'm pregnant," Elise released, unable to prepare the ground or soften the news. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Graham just stared at her, processing. "Pregnant," he repeated as if testing the word. "I know we didn't plan it," Elise began quickly, words tumbling over each other. "I know it's terrible timing, and if you don't want it, I understand. We can—" "Stop!" Graham interrupted her, raising a hand. Then slowly a smile began to form on his face. You're pregnant. We're going to have a baby. You're not angry." "Angry?" Graham seemed genuinely confused. "Why would I be angry?" "Elise, it's unexpected, yes, but it's wonderful." "Is it?" Elise felt tears begin. "How can it be wonderful? I don't know anything about babies. Never looked after one. Can barely look after myself sometimes." Graham pulled her into an embrace. "Nobody knows what they're doing when they have their first child. I certainly didn't with Piper, but we figure it out. Together." "But you've done this before." Elise sobbed against his shoulder. "You know what to do." "I don't know anything." "Then I'll teach you," Graham said simply, "and you'll discover your own ways, and we'll make mistakes and get things right together." Elise pulled away to look at him. "Do you really want this?" "I do," Graham said without hesitation. "I want a family with you. I want to see you as a mother. I want to give Piper a brother or sister. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it'll change everything. But the best things in life usually do." And there, in his arms, Elise felt the panic begin to diminish. It didn't disappear completely. She was still terrified. But now there was also a touch of excitement. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Telling Piper was surprisingly easier. "So I'm going to be a big sister?" she asked, eyes wide. "Yes," Elise confirmed. "What do you think?" Piper thought seriously for a moment. "I need to teach the baby lots of things. How to tie shoes. How not to be afraid of the dark. How to make Elise laugh when she's sad." Elise's heart melted. "You're going to be an amazing sister." "I know," Piper said with the simple confidence of childhood. "I've practiced with my younger friends at school." The news was more complicated with the families. Helen cried, tears of joy mixed with obvious maternal worry. "You've barely settled," she said through the video call. "How are you going to manage with work? And with Piper? And—" "Mum," Elise interrupted her gently. "I'll figure it out, just like you figured it out with me." Helen stopped, then laughed through the tears. "You're right. You'll figure it out. And you're going to be a wonderful mother." The words meant more than Elise expected. The pregnancy brought its own challenges, morning sickness that lasted all day, fatigue so deep Elise fell asleep sitting on the sofa, mood swings that made her cry at telly adverts. But it also brought moments of pure magic. The first ultrasound, where they saw the baby moving. The moment when Elise felt the first kick. The night when Graham fell asleep with his hand on her belly, talking to the baby. Piper was fascinated by the pregnancy, constantly wanting to touch her belly, talking to the baby, making elaborate plans about how she'd be the best big sister in the world. "I'm going to protect the baby from everything," she declared one night. "Nobody's going to be mean to my brother or sister." The protective ferocity in the 9-year-old's voice made Elise and Graham exchange an emotional look. But in the 7th month, everything nearly fell apart. Elise started having contractions. They were too early, 2 months too early. The doctor ordered absolute bed rest. "If you don't rest," he said severely, "there's real risk of premature birth." Suddenly, Elise found herself confined to the sofa, forbidden from working, from doing anything except rest. The independence she'd fought so hard to build was ripped away. She hated it, hated feeling useless, hated depending on others, hated watching Graham do everything, work, look after Piper, look after the house, look after her. "I should be doing something," she complained one afternoon, frustration evident. "You are," Graham responded calmly, bringing her water. "You're keeping our baby safe. That's the most important thing. It doesn't feel like enough." "It's more than enough," Graham insisted. "Elise, let me look after you. You spent months looking after me, Piper, everyone. Now it's my turn." It was hard to accept. It was humiliating at times. But Elise learned to receive care with the same grace she'd learned to give it, and the baby remained safe, continuing to grow. 2 weeks before the due date, in the middle of the night, Elise woke with sharp pain. "Graham," she shook her husband, "I think it's time." The panic that crossed his face would be comical if she wasn't in so much pain. "Now? Are you sure? What if it's a false alarm?" "Graham!" Elise shouted when another contraction came. "Now!" What followed was a blur of chaotic activity. Graham running to get the hospital bag they'd prepared. Margot waking up to stay with Piper. The race to the hospital through empty early morning streets. Labor was long. 22 hours of pain that tested every limit Elise thought she had. But Graham was there, holding her hand, wiping her sweat, whispering encouragement when she thought she couldn't go on. "You can do this," he said repeatedly. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." And she did. When finally the baby's cry filled the delivery room, loud and indignant at the audacity of being brought into the world, Elise collapsed back on the bed, exhausted beyond description. "It's a boy," the nurse announced, placing the tiny baby on Elise's chest. A boy. They had a son. Elise looked at that tiny being, covered in vernix and perfect in impossible ways, and felt something settle deeply in her chest. Love. Love so big it hurt. "Hi," she whispered to the baby. "I'm your mum, and I'm going to mess some things up, but I'm going to love you with everything I have. I promise." Graham was crying openly, kissing Elise's forehead, looking at their son with wonder. "He's perfect," Graham murmured. "He's ours," Elise corrected. And in that moment, in the delivery room that was too bright and smelled of disinfectant and blood, Elise finally understood. The trembling confession she'd made so long ago, "I've never done this before," wasn't about relationships or sex or any of the obvious things. It was about life, about risking, about allowing herself to feel. And she had. She'd risked, she'd felt, she'd lived, and it was worth every moment of fear. 18 months later, Elise was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, a routine that had become sacred in that chaotic family. The flat was different now, full of life in ways she'd never imagined. Toys scattered across the sitting room, Piper's drawings stuck to the fridge, framed photos on the walls showing their evolution as a family. At the kitchen table, Graham held Oliver, that's what they'd called the baby in honor of Elise's grandfather, who was determined to eat his own hands instead of the fruit puree being offered. "You're just like your mum," Graham was saying to his son, wiping banana puree from his chin. "Stubborn." "I heard that," Elise called, flipping pancakes on the hob. Piper appeared running from the sitting room, already in her school uniform, her now 11 years bringing a maturity that sometimes surprised Elise. "Did Oliver spit food on Dad again?" she asked, observing the scene. "Your brother is expressing his culinary preferences," Graham said with dignity, though he was covered in baby food. "He'd rather eat his hands," Piper translated, taking a pancake straight from the pan. "Use a plate," Elise warned automatically, a routine that had become as natural as breathing. Margot entered the kitchen, already dressed for work, grabbing coffee whilst checking her mobile. "Good morning, Brighton's loudest family," she greeted. "Oliver, stop tormenting your father. Piper, you have a presentation today, remember?" "I remember," Piper grumbled. "Everyone keeps reminding me. I'm not a child." "You're literally 11, Margot pointed out. "Exactly, almost a teenager." Elise and Graham exchanged a horrified look, making Margot laugh. The morning continued in its organized chaos, Graham leaving to take Piper to school before work, Margot rushing off to a meeting, Elise staying with Oliver, who'd recently learned to crawl and was determined to explore every corner of the flat. It was only when the flat finally quietened, with Oliver taking his morning nap, that Elise had a moment to breathe. She sat on the balcony, coffee finally cooling in her hands, looking at the view of the sea in the distance. Brighton had stopped being the frightening city she'd moved to and had become home. Real home. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. We're arriving tomorrow. Can't wait to see my grandson. Elise smiled. Helen and David had become frequent visitors, flying over every 2 months to spend time with the grandchildren. Their relationship with Graham had warmed considerably, especially after they'd seen how he'd cared for Elise during the pregnancy. Another message, this time from her boss. Congratulations, the client loved the project. They want you leading the next campaign too. Shall we discuss a raise? Elise read the message twice. There was a time she would have immediately accepted, anxious to prove her worth. Now she considered. Did she want to lead another big project with an 18-month-old baby at home? She typed back, "Can I think about it? I want to discuss with my family first." The response came quickly. "Of course. You have until next week." My family, Elise thought. When had that change happened? When had she stopped making decisions alone and started considering them as part of a bigger whole? The sound of Oliver waking came from the bedroom. Elise went in to find him standing in the cot, holding the bars, smiling that gummy smile that completely melted her heart. "Hello, my love." She picked him up, feeling the comforting weight of him against her hip. "Did you sleep well?" Oliver responded by babbling something she interpreted as yes and hugged his head against her neck. Her mobile rang. Graham, video call. "Hi," she answered, adjusting the camera to show Oliver. "Hello, my beautiful son." Graham waved at the baby, who shrieked with joy at seeing his father. "And hello, my beautiful wife." "How did it go with Piper?" "She's nervous about the presentation but won't admit it," Graham reported. "You know how she is. But she'll smash it, I'm sure." "She always does," Elise agreed. "I heard you coming in late last night. Everything all right at work?" "Yes, just a small problem with the project. Nothing I couldn't sort out." He paused. "But I've been thinking, the project's almost finished. A few more months." Elise felt her heart race. "And then?" And then I have choices to make," Graham said carefully. "They want me to stay, lead the next project, but I also have offers in other cities. And there's the possibility of opening my own practice here. What do you want to do?" "It depends on you," Graham responded. "On us, on what we want for our family." "I need time to think too," Elise admitted. "I got offered a promotion, but it means more working hours." Graham was quiet for a moment. "Then let's do this properly this time. Sit down, talk, decide together. As a team." "As a team," Elise echoed, smiling. After she hung up, she carried Oliver to the sitting room and sat on the floor with him, letting him explore the toys scattered about. Watching her son, it was still strange to think that play, Elise reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she was a 24-year-old woman terrified of her own shadow, convinced she was too behind, too inexperienced, too inadequate for any kind of real love. Now she was 26, wife, stepmother, mother. She'd built a career in a new city. She'd faced fears she didn't even know she had. She'd failed and got back up. She'd loved and been loved. She wasn't perfect. Still had days where she burnt dinner. Still had moments of doubt. Still caught herself waking in the middle of the night, checking if Oliver was breathing, terrified by the responsibility of keeping another human being alive. But she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in ways she'd never imagined possible. That night, with everyone gathered for dinner, Graham, Piper, Oliver in his high chair, Margot sharing stories from work, Elise looked around the table and felt deep gratitude. "What are you smiling about?" Graham asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about how my life's changed," Elise admitted, "about who I was and who I am now." "And?" Piper asked. "Do you like who you are now?" "I love who I am now," Elise said without hesitation. "I love you lot. I love this mad, messy life we've built." "Even when Piper leaves clothes on the floor?" Margot teased. "Oi," Piper protested. "Even when Graham forgets to lock the door," Elise continued, smiling. "That happened once," Graham defended himself. "Even when Oliver decides 3 in the morning is party time," she added, making everyone laugh. Oliver, sensing he was the center of attention, gave a shriek of joy and threw food in the air, hitting Graham. "That's my boy," Graham said with false pride, wiping mashed potato from his face. The laughter that filled the flat was warm, genuine, full of love. And Elise thought about how it all began, with shaking hands and a whispered confession. I've never done this before. She'd been so scared, so convinced of her inadequacy. But Graham had seen through the fear, had seen the strength she didn't know she possessed, and with patience and love, had helped her find that strength. No, Elise corrected mentally. He hadn't given her strength, just created safe space for her to discover the strength she'd always had. Later, when everyone was asleep and Elise did her nightly rounds checking doors and windows, a routine she'd inherited from her mother, she stopped at Piper's bedroom door. The girl was sleeping with an arm hanging out of the bed, hair spread across the pillow. 11 years old now, growing up so fast. No longer the wary 8-year-old she'd met. Now she was almost a teenager, full of opinions and dreams. But she was still her Piper. The girl who'd been her first experience of maternal love even before having Oliver. In the next room, Oliver slept in his cot, breathing soft and steady. Elise watched him for long minutes, still marveled that she'd created this life, that she was responsible for this tiny, perfect human being. And finally, she went to her own bedroom, where Graham was already sleeping. An arm stretched out on her side of the bed as he always did, even unconsciously searching for her. Elise slid into bed, fitting perfectly against him. Graham murmured something unintelligible and pulled her closer. "I love you," she whispered in the dark. Graham, half asleep, responded, "Love you too, always." And Elise closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to rest. The journey that began with so much fear had transformed into something beautiful. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid and theirs. She'd learned it wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and choosing love anyway. It was about trust, in herself, in others, in the process. It was about discovering that strength didn't mean never falling, but always getting back up. And above all, it was about realizing that the best stories aren't about perfect people making perfect choices. They're about imperfect people, with fears and flaws and scars, choosing to risk, choosing to try, choosing to love. And when Elise fell asleep that night, embraced by the man who'd transformed her life in a flat full of family she'd chosen and built, she knew with absolute certainty she'd chosen right. Every single time. The house was in complete chaos, boxes piled up everywhere, furniture covered with sheets, Piper running between rooms with Oliver crawling determinedly after her. "Be careful with the baby," Elise called from the midst of the mess, trying to pack books. "He's fine," Piper responded. "I'm looking after him." Graham entered through the front door carrying more boxes, sweat dripping down his forehead. "That was the last load from the van," he announced, carefully setting down the boxes. "How's it going in here?" "Slowly," Elise admitted, looking around. How did something that seemed so small generate so much stuff? They decided, after weeks of discussion and planning, to take the next step. Graham had opened his own architecture practice in Brighton, smaller, but his. Elise had accepted the promotion, but negotiated flexible hours. And with the changes at work, they decided they needed more space. A proper house with a garden for Oliver to run in when he started walking, and a room of her own for Piper, who was growing up too fast. The house they'd found was perfect for them. 3 bedrooms, an office Graham and Elise would share, and a small but sunny garden. "Is Margot sad to lose you as flatmates?" Graham asked, opening a box labelled kitchen. "She is," Elise smiled. "But the flat's hers now, with rent she can afford, and we're 10 minutes away. She said she'll turn up every week for dinner. And bring her favourite Thai food that she cooks better than us," Graham hoped. "Probably," Elise laughed. Piper suddenly appeared, holding an object wrapped in old newspaper. "What's this?" she asked, beginning to unwrap it. It was a photo frame. The picture showed Elise and Graham on their wedding day, both smiling widely, happy in a way only people who don't know what's coming can be. "It's us," Piper exclaimed. "You look so young." "It was 2 years ago," Elise protested. "Exactly," Piper said, with the wisdom of her 11 years. "Ages ago." Elise took the photo frame, studying the picture. Piper was right in a way. They looked young, not in age but in experience. They still hadn't faced the difficulties that would come, the fights and reconciliations, the sleepless nights with a newborn. But there was something in the photo that remained the same, the way Graham looked at her, the way she leaned towards him, The love that was obvious, even through a frozen image. Let's put this in the new sitting room, Elise decided. Pride of place. It took 2 weeks to unpack everything and make the house seem minimally habitable, but slowly it came to life. Piper's drawings on the walls, Oliver's blocks scattered across the sitting room, plants Graham insisted on caring for personally, Elise's design books on shelves Graham had built especially for her. The first night they spent in the house, with Piper finally sleeping in her new room and Oliver settled in his cot beside the main bedroom, Elise and Graham sat on the back porch. "We have a porch," Elise said in wonder, "with space for plants and everything." "We have a garden," Graham added. "Oliver will be able to play outside." "We have a house," Elise concluded. "Our house." Graham pulled her closer, kissing her hair. "Remember when you were so scared of moving to Brighton, thinking you'd made the biggest mistake of your life?" "I remember," Elise admitted. "Feels like a lifetime ago. And now?" "Now." Elise looked at the house behind her, thought about the children sleeping inside, the man beside her. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Graham's phone buzzed. He checked it, then showed the screen to Elise. It was a photo Piper had sent to the family group. Yes, they had a WhatsApp group now, complete with Elise's mum, dad, Margot, and even Graham's ex-wife, who'd become a strange but functional part of the extended family. The photo showed Piper pulling a face at the camera, with Oliver appearing blurry in the background. The caption said, "First selfie in new room. Oliver photobombed, but that's okay." "She's growing up so fast," Elise murmured. "We all are," Graham observed. "In good ways." And it was true. They'd grown, not just in age, but in wisdom, in patience, in capacity to love. It was their 3rd wedding anniversary. Helen and David had come over to look after the children, insisting Elise and Graham needed a night just the 2 of them. "You work too hard," Helen had said. "Go out, have dinner. Remember you're a couple, not just parents." And so, for the first time in months, Elise found herself dressed up in a nice dress, makeup done, going to dinner with her husband. They went to the same cafe where they'd met, now expanded and renovated, but still with the same essence. "Remember?" Graham asked as they sat down. "You were soaking wet from the rain. You knocked my coffee all over me." "You laughed," Elise remembered. "I thought you were mad." "I was," Graham agreed, "mad about you from that very first moment." "Liar," Elise accused gently. "You didn't know me." "No," Graham admitted, "but I wanted to. And every day since then I've fallen a little more in love. Even when I'm impossible?" "Especially when you're impossible," he smiled, "because it means you're comfortable enough to be completely yourself with me." Elise took his hand across the table. 3 years. It feels like more and less at the same time." "I know exactly what you mean," Graham squeezed her hand. "But you know what's mad? I can't wait for the next 3, and the 3 after that, and all the ones that come. Even knowing it'll be difficult sometimes." "Especially knowing that," Graham said seriously. "Because I've learned that the things worth having are usually difficult, and you, our family, are definitely worth it." As they ate dinner, talking about everything and nothing, Elise reflected on how different she was from that frightened woman who whispered, "I've never done this before," 3 years ago. That woman had thought she'd never be enough, that her inexperience made her less somehow. Now Elise understood that everyone starts inexperienced, everyone is afraid, everyone doubts. The difference is in who chooses to risk anyway. When they returned home late that night, they found Helen and David asleep on the sofa, the telly still on at low volume. A note was on the coffee table. Children were angels. Oliver slept at 8, Piper at 9:30 after 3 stories. You deserve this night. Mum. Elise smiled, covering her parents with a blanket before going to check on the children. Piper was sprawled across the bed, breathing deep with heavy sleep. Oliver was curled up with his favorite blanket, thumb in his mouth. Back in the bedroom, Elise found Graham already in bed, waiting for her. "Come here," he said, lifting the duvet. Elise snuggled against him, fitting perfectly as she always did. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For being patient when I was learning. For never making me feel inadequate, for building this life with me." "Elise," Graham turned to face her, serious now. You saved me. When I met you, I was convinced I'd never love again, that I'd never trust again. You showed me I was wrong. We saved each other, Elise corrected. Together. And when they kissed that night, it was a kiss of renewed promise, of love tested and proven, of partnership built day after day. Elise was in the home office working on a project when she heard the front door open violently. Mum! Piper's voice, now 14 and carrying all the drama that came with that age, echoed through the house. Office, Elise called back. Piper appeared in the doorway, school uniform rumpled, hair disheveled. You are not going to believe what happened today. Before she could elaborate, Oliver appeared running, now a boy of almost 4, full of energy. Mum! Mum! Look what I drew! He waved a paper with what appeared to be stick figure family. It's us! Elise took the drawing, studying it. There were 5 figures, 2 big, 2 medium, 1 small. Who's this? She asked, pointing at the 5th figure. It's Granny Marg, Oliver explained. She lives with us at weekends. Not technically, but Margot did spend so much time there. She had a drawer of clothes and her own toothbrush. It's beautiful, love, Elise said sincerely. Let's put it on the fridge. The fridge is for babies, Piper grumbled. I stopped putting drawings there when I was like 8. I'm not a baby, Oliver protested. I'm almost 4. Exactly. Baby. Piper. Children, Elise intervened before the fight escalated. Piper, tell me what happened. Oliver, come help me stick this on the fridge. While she fixed Oliver's drawing with a magnet, the fridge was covered with them no matter what Piper said. The teenager told her dramatic story about something that happened at school involving a girl, a boy, and swapped lockers. Elise listened, made appropriate sounds at the right moments, and thought about how her life had become gloriously normal. There weren't big dramas anymore, no more existential crises about having made the right choice. There was just life, daily, messy, beautiful, frustrating, joyful life, and she loved every second of it. Graham arrived home an hour later, bringing pizza because it was Friday, and Friday tradition was pizza. How was everyone's day? He asked as they sat around the dining table. Piper had drama, Oliver reported, and I drew the family. Oliver's being a baby, Piper counterattacked. Nobody's a baby here, Elise intervened automatically, and everyone eat. But whilst they ate dinner, laughing and talking and occasionally bickering, there was a harmony to it, a sense of being exactly where they should be. After the children went to bed, Oliver easily, Piper, after much negotiation about bedtime, Elise and Graham finally had a moment alone. 5 years, Graham said, pulling her to the sofa. I sort of can't believe it. I know, Elise agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like you've always been here. Regretting anything? It was a question he asked occasionally, not from insecurity, but from genuine curiosity. Not once, Elise answered honestly. And you? Only that I didn't meet you sooner, Graham said. We could have had more time together. But then we wouldn't be us, Elise pointed out. I needed to grow. You needed to go through what you went through. We met at the right time. Deep philosophy for a Friday night, Graham teased. I'm deep, Elise feigned offense. Very deep. Yes, you are, Graham agreed, but serious now, and strong and amazing, and you still surprise me every day. Graham, let me finish, he interrupted her gently. You think it's me who made you grow, who helped you be brave, but it was the opposite. You taught me it's all right to be vulnerable again. That loving isn't weakness, that families can form in unexpected ways and be perfect anyway. Elise felt tears prickle. We taught each other. Yes, Graham agreed. We did. Her decade since the day Elise, with trembling hands and racing heart, whispered the words that would change everything. I've never done this before. Now, at 34, she stood on the same beach where Graham had taken her when she was desperate in those first months in Brighton, but she wasn't alone this time. Piper, now 19 and in her first year of university, stood beside her. No longer the wary 8-year-old, but a confident young woman who spoke openly about wanting to study psychology to help children going through what she went through. Oliver, at 8, was building an elaborate sandcastle, narrating a complex story about dragons and knights to himself. And there was a new addition. Emma, at 2, was running after the waves with shrieks of delight, her infectious laughter echoing across the beach. Graham ran to catch Emma before she got too wet, spinning her in the air whilst she laughed. "Careful, Dad," Piper called. "You're not young anymore." "I'm 46, Graham protested. "I'm not old." "Practically 50, Piper teased, making Oliver laugh. Elise watched her family, because that's what they were completely and absolutely, and felt deep gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights of arguing, days of doubt, moments where she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. But there had been many more moments of joy, of laughter, of love so deep it almost hurt. "What are you thinking about?" Margot asked, appearing beside her, still single but happy, still an integral part of their family. "About how everything changed," Elise admitted, "about who I was and who I am." "And?" Margot encouraged. "And I'm grateful I took the risk," Elise said simply, "for being brave even when I was terrified." Margot smiled, putting her arm around her friend's shoulders. "Look at you, the girl who was afraid to order coffee became this amazing woman." "The woman was always there," Elise corrected. "She just needed a reason to appear." Graham approached, Emma still in his arms. "Ready to go? Your mum's making that special lunch." "Oh yes, Helen and David had moved to Brighton 2 years ago, not wanting to miss any more moments with the grandchildren. Sunday lunches at their house had become sacred." "Let's go," Elise agreed. As they walked across the sand towards the car park, Emma asleep on Graham's shoulder, Oliver held Elise's hand, and Piper walked alongside, talking about an article she'd read for university. And Elise thought about the confession she'd made so long ago. "I've never done this before." It had been about so much. About love, yes, but also about trust, about vulnerability, about allowing herself to be seen, and Graham had responded not with judgment or rush, but with patience, with respect, with love that gave space for her to grow. But the real answer to that confession, Elise realized now, hadn't come from Graham. It had come from herself. By choosing to risk, by choosing to trust, by choosing to believe she deserved love even without being perfect, by choosing every day to love and be loved. That was the answer. That had always been the answer. And as they drove towards her parents' house, with children chattering in the back seat and Graham singing quietly along to the radio, Elise held his hand and knew with absolute certainty she'd got it right, even with fear, even without knowing, even being the first time. She'd got it right. And the life they'd built together, imperfect, chaotic, beautiful, Sam was proof of that. It wasn't about never being afraid. It was about having the courage to love anyway. And Elise had found that courage. Every day she chose it again, and she always would.